I had always liked the rain. In fact, one of my most vivid childhood memories is of standing in my yard, a storm pissing down all around me, and just being. I remember the smell of the air, how fresh it was, how crisp. I remember the feel of the earth and how my feet seemed to sink into it, as if dragged down by Mother Nature herself. I remember being entranced by the streams of water that ran down my soaked clothes, flowing like miniature rivers through canyons and valleys of bunched fabric. Anyway, as I was saying, I've always liked the rain, so it was with little consequence that I stood in it, waiting for my friend, Carl, to open his door. Carl had called me less than an hour before. From the sound of his voice, I could tell immediately that something had been wrong. I had asked him about it, but all he was able to parse was a whispered plea for me to come over, and so I had. The sound of rain on an umbrella was a new melody I was coming to appreciate. The dull, rapid-fire thudding of small, numerous impacts on the plastic had its own beauty to it. I had never liked the things much. Umbrellas, that is, preferring to walk unencumbered through the rain, reveling in the feel and an unobstructed view of the graying sky. Or, if entirely necessary, I would don a raincoat, enjoying the small streams it produced on my body, like I was the life-giving mountains and the rain was the fertile Nile. But I suppose one could find the beauty in most anything if one were to look hard enough. The door opened, the action following a frantic patter of footsteps, and I was face to face with Carl. No one would accuse Carl of being an attractive man. His features were too round for that, his eyes too far apart. That being said, he wasn't entirely unattractive either. His face had a certain warmth to it that could take the sting out of any misfortune. One could find the beauty in most anything. A statement I was beginning to rethink, for right now, there was little beauty to be found in Carl Dolerti. All of his characteristic warmth was gone. His eyes were muted and swam with a typhoon of frantic emotion and indecision. The man ran a hand through his disheveled hair, affixing it to its usual slicked-back 1950s gangster look. I had asked him about it once. His response was that he thought it made him look cool, tough. We stood there for a short while, staring at one another. I tried to meet the man's eyes, but they were downcast. He seemed lost and fragile, as if a slight breeze would blow him away. "Hey man, you wanted something. Sorry, not to be rude, but it's like 9:30. You sounded pretty shaken up on the phone. You okay?" I bent over as I spoke, lowering my head some so I could look Carl in the eyes. He didn't seem to be present, just a puppet put on autopilot. Carl wasn't home, not really. "Yeah, sure, sorry, come in," he said softly, moving to the side and gesturing me in with an outstretched arm. I obliged, deconstructing the umbrella and placing it in a holder with a fluid movement. We stood awkwardly in the opening hallway to the man's house. Most of the lights were off, and those that were on cast the room in an alien orange glow. "So, do you mind telling me why you invited me over? Not that I don't like coming over, it's just, I gotta work tomorrow. Anyway, you can't be staying up this late either. Don't you have to take your daughter to school? Sally, wasn't it?" "Yeah, Sally. Come on, let me get you a drink." Carl began to walk toward his office. He didn't turn to see if I followed. He didn't wait for my confirmation either. As soon as he had finished his quiet, deadpan delivery, he pottered off further into his house. Reluctantly, I followed. Entering the room, I was hit immediately by the mess of it. I had only been in Carl's office a few times before, and each and every time it had been immaculate in its cleanliness. This was giving me anxiety just looking at it. There were filing cabinets left open, papers strewn about the floor, and piled up on the desk in precarious towers, books taken off shelves and laid on the floor, and amongst the madness was Carl, hunched over his desk, pouring 2 glasses of a brown liquor with shaking hands. Turning, he handed me one. "I really can't. I trailed off. Carl wasn't listening. He had thrown his head back, finishing the entire overfull glass in one go. Swallowing, he looked back at me, steel in his eyes for the first time tonight. The shaking in his hands slowed. "Sally's sick," he blurted out. No further explanation was given. "Sick? How?" I asked tentatively, placing my untouched drink down on his desk. He didn't seem to notice. "I don't know how, John. You're the fucking doctor. You're the one who's supposed to know," he snapped, sitting down at his desk in a huff, hands running across his scalp again, messing up his previously perfect hair. The man rested his head in his hands. He looked like he was backed into a corner. "Okay, what symptoms is she showing? Does she have a fever, coughing, any blood? Come on, Carl, give me something to work with here. Have you taken her to a doctor?" "No doctors." He said it offhand, but his tone was intense. I didn't question it. "All right, so back to symptoms. Has she been doing anything strange?" "Strange? John, she was wailing like a fucking animal, foaming at the mouth she was. I ran up to grab her and she damned near burned my hand off. I don't know what's wrong with her, John. Please, you gotta help me." He looked up with the last few words. His eyes met mine and they were awash with desperation and fear. Okay. Take me to her." I swallowed before the last sentence and steeled myself. I sounded braver than I felt. I was afraid for John and for Sally. They were good people. They didn't deserve this. "Thank God, John. You're a lifesaver. Come, I'll take you to her." He rose from his chair and shook my hand like a madman. He clutched it tight before letting go, pulling me into him. He was stronger than he looked. "I mean it, John. Thank you." I dismissed his praise as unnecessary and let him lead me into his labyrinth house. Through corridors and doors and arches and rooms we went. Walls began to blend into one another. Paintings began to lose their uniqueness, but after what felt like forever, we arrived at a solid wooden door. The 2 of us stood there for a moment, him fumbling with a set of keys, trying to unlock the door, and me, my eyes locked onto the wood, trying to steady my hands and still my nerves. I could hear my heart pumping, thumping over and over again. Boom, boom, boom. It was like the sound of the rain again, just far less pleasant. The metallic click of the lock brought me back to the present. Carl opened the door and ushered me in. The room was dark. I couldn't make out Sally. As I passed him, Carl whispered, his voice hoarse, "She's in there, John. Help her, please." I swallowed as I entered the dark room. I could barely make out my hands in front of myself. The only light in the room was that which filtered in from the open door, and even that seemed reluctant to enter the room. "Sally?" I asked nervously. In response, I was greeted by a slight, wheezing exhale from the far end of the room. Walking forward, faster now that I had a heading, I forged my way forward into the darkness. I found Sally. She was standing, leaning against the wall. Her small, petite face was upturned to the sky, seemingly in prayer. Her skin was porcelain pale. It was the only normal part of her. Her hair seemed to be more plant than human, like branches or wooden tentacles. It sprouted from her scalp, reaching for the roof, digging into the plaster of the ceiling hungrily as it held her up, dangling her like a fucking chandelier. Her torso was like a cross-section. All of the skin had been removed, so too had the flesh, and the ribs had been splayed outward, giving one a full view of the little girl's still beating organs and the way her body seemed to intertwine itself with plant matter. More branches sprouted in the chest cavity, encircling and constricting her organs. There were fungal growths too. They grew on and from her splayed out ribs, enlarging them and making the shape of two profane wings spreading out from the girl's chest, like an angel. A distorted, horrific angel. Finally, the girl had no legs. At least, not visible ones anyway. I was frozen. My mind had stopped working, refusing to take in the scene, refusing to believe. I turned back to Carl, my head moved with janky, slow movements. I looked at the man, but he refused to meet my eyes. But even while he was looking at the ground, I could tell he was crying. His muscles seemed taut, clenched with emotional rather than physical strain. She's in pain, John. Can't you see? Oh God, forgive me. John, I'm so sorry. Sally, darling, I've brought another moth to the flame. With that, he slammed the door on me. I shot across the now pitch-dark room, chasing the reverberating echoes of the shutting door. He locked it. The sound helped me find the handle, and I tugged on it like a madman. Carl, open the fucking door. I'll fucking kill you. Open the motherfucking door. I screamed at him. I could hear him crying on the other side of the wood. I'm sorry, he wailed. Another wave of sobs racking his form. Open the door. I punctuated the statement by kicking the door with all of my strength. It shook violently in its frame. But hold it did, and the knockback from the last kick had put me on my arse. Getting up, I was ready for round 2. But then I saw it. Behind me there was a dull glow. It was a mossy green in color. It was coming from the corner of the room. From Sally. I turned, slowly, my hands shaking violently, my heart pounding like a fucking EDM track. The girl was glowing. It looked like a kind of bioluminescence, the type you see in fish. The plant parts, they were glowing with a pale, sad, green light, illuminating the poor thing's features and casting ominous shadows across the lines of her face and neck. I felt the sight worm its way into my brain, hungrily eating away at my sanity like a little worm on the gray matter of my head. Munch, chomp, chew. She was mesmerizing, beautiful in a horrific way. I was captivated, entranced. She was the rain. She was the graying sky and the rolling clouds. She was the green places, the forgotten woods and the swelling brooks. She was the watchman who stands alone on the hill. She was the light. She was the dark. She was the moth that flies and the beetle that burrows. She was Sally, and she opened her eyes, and I was nothing. Hey, it's me again. I'm just here to give you a heads up that James Salander has posted many other stories on Reddit, and they're all actually in the same universe. So, if you're curious about Dr. John and Sally and Carl Dolerti, I highly recommend checking out James's Reddit, which of course will be linked in the description. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you to the incredible authors that allow me to narrate their stories. This author's links will be in the description. Feel free to send me your own scary story at the email on the screen. And until next time, sleep tight.